The web should be a place where we can do more things than just scrolling vertically.
But how do you guys fundamentally use storytelling?
We work with our clients on a simple question saying, what's this a story about?
Obviously, it's a great differentiator.
Every process is just unique in its own way, and it's a roller coaster ride every single time.
Yeah. Maybe that's another aspect of this episode.
Is this the time where we have to say AI?
The average lifespan is only about 28,000 days. How are you spending your days, and what will you do with your time? This week on Low-Key Legends, I'm joined by Jonas and Steffen, the founding partners of Studio 28K, a design studio based in Copenhagen and Toronto. Together, we explore how these profound questions have helped shape their mission, their process, and their dedication to creating unforgettable experiences, brands, and products. We dive into 28K's use of storytelling as a cornerstone for them designing holistic digital experiences. We look at their interesting approach to running a studio like a Michelin star restaurant, and much more. Before Studio 28K, Jonas and Steffen collectively worked at Hello Monday, Weno, and Jam3, where they were leading teams, defining new processes, and learning the foundations of how to run their future studio. So let's get a little bit stoic and ask ourselves the important questions to figure out how to best spend our time that we have left on Earth. So sit back and let's get into it. Jonas, Steffen, thank you guys so much for coming on the show. It's really good to meet you. You're in two different pockets of the world, Copenhagen and Toronto. So the time zones align synergistically, and it's good to have you here.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Appreciate
Absolutely.
you saying Toronto. That means you know what's up.
Did I say it wrong or right?
No, you said it right.
Oh, okay.
At least that's how the locals say it.
What would be the wrong way? Now I'm curious.
You can tell people are from out of town when they say Toronto.
Oh, with like a hard T and an O. Okay.
When you actually say the T's, which is weird because you should say them, but if you're local, you're from Toronto.
Yeah, I feel like that's also like a New England thing where I am. Is like you just have like lazy speech, so that's like
yeah,
you have really hard R's like or maybe that's a soft R, but and then there's just like lazy letters just thrown in there. But who knows? Maybe just English speakers are lazy in that way.
Oh no. The part of Denmark that I'm from, we speak down here and everything is like cluttered it together. So my wife is Australian and she's like, I don't understand a word that you guys are saying from there. It's a global thing.
Yeah, it must be for sure. I wanted to kick us off, maybe a little philosophical, maybe a little bit stoic, but on average, I did the research and I have about 17,050 days left in my life on average. And just speaking with you guys, reading about this studio, this made me heavily reflect on my life personally, but also like what it is that I want to do in my life. And I feel like that'll be a natural through line through the course of this conversation of 28K and just the overall foundational mission and kind of like the essential theme of the studio. But we can kind of dive in. And I guess like my question to you is, how do you want to use your days, and how does that play into your role as a creative studio? And does that meaning and purpose drive every interaction at the studio that you've created?
Yeah, I mean, we try to make sure that it drives everything and build it into most of the things we do. And if we're doing something wrong, or we feel like we're doing something wrong, it's always very powerful to be able to go back and say like, well, does this, based on our mission and our philosophy, does this make sense, or do we need to revise it? I can answer. So what we want to do with our lives, I can answer for my own part, is a big part of it is doing something you are passionate about and gives you meaning in life. And to me, that can be anything. It does. To us, it's about creativity and design, but for people, it doesn't have to be about that. But something that brings you meaning, and then to top that off, and then do it with people you also like spending time with and people you care about. because that's what I think makes it special and worth the time as well. Because again, we're spending so many hours of our life working, so you should do it with people you like and you care about, while doing something you don't feel is wasting away your time.
That's exactly it. I mean, I just want to wake up in the morning and do something meaningful to me, something that doesn't feel like work, it doesn't feel like chores, uh, homework. I just want to go and enjoy myself and feel like I'm growing as a human, right? Like in whatever aspect that is.
I'm curious where you first ran into maybe that statistic, and then to base the name of your studio and kind of like the mission statement, I think is really powerful. Obviously, it's a great differentiator and probably helps you connect to a specific group of clients, and it's probably helped to niche you guys in a really strategic way. But maybe let's start at the beginning of that, where we're just addressing when did you first run into that concept and how did it kind of transform your thinking to make you want to use it as a name for a creative studio?
Well, let's also first be honest, it's not a precise statistic. It depends on where you are in the world, and in most cases your life is actually going to be a little more than that, and it is not precisely 28,000 either. So just to the academics and scientists out there who's gonna grill us, don't worry, we know. We are just it's more poetic that way. The first time I ran into it, it was somewhat random. When I think I heard it in a podcast or something, and then I looked up, hey, how many? They talked about how long an average life was, and then I wondered how many days is it, and then that approximate number popped up, and then didn't think much more about it until years later, when Jonas and I are then, we have decided we are starting our studio and we're getting all our thoughts down on paper, right? And we have a lot of them. We have a lot of ideas, and we know what we want. We know a lot of what we don't want it to be. That's always easy, right? So it shouldn't be this, it shouldn't be that, but it was hard to get to the essence of, so what is it then? And I think it was in that journey where as we kept circling around like a shark that circles around its prey, this idea came up again that a lot of the things we felt we wanted to do could be summarized with this idea, which had actually appeared years earlier with no application for it at that time. And once those two and two were put together, then it was like, yes, now it's starting to make sense. Now it's summarizing these ideas that we have, some pointing in this way, some pointing in that, but what they have in common is this idea of 28K.
I still remember the evening. So we Stefan came basically, I think, a week before I had my first daughter, and said, "Let's build the studio." And while we were brainstorming in between nappies on naming and concept and all that, I do remember when he brought this idea to the table, and I was just like, I think that's it. I don't recall us trying other directions after we'd had that conversation. I think we almost the same evening went in and bought domains, everything, because it was just, to me, it just made so much sense, because it became a larger idea than just a design shop, right? It spans across everything, and everyone can relate to it in a way. And I love that you mentioned that you started reflecting on your own life, and that's exactly what we want people to do, because we want everyone to spend their time meaningfully. We want them to get the most out of the time that we are here.
It's important and probably something to do routinely, because it'll help to guide the compass of your life in hopefully the right direction, or help you to pivot and reorient if you are in like a season that is particularly challenging or needs that reflection. And I do think that, again, tying it to like the business or the strategic side, it could be a very beautiful poetic concept, but I would imagine that, and I can't speak for everyone, but I would imagine that it would help to funnel clients that have a particular mission and vision for their organization?
We have had cases of people wanting us to work on things where they were really captivated by that story of the brand, and they could really relate to it. And I would say the proposal process was almost not needed because they were already convinced. They already felt a deep connection. There's also been other cases, weapon companies or something like that have knocked our doors where we were like, hell no, because that just goes straight up against 28,000 days. We don't want to make it shorter than possible. We have felt that it resonates with certain clients. And I think as we grow and as time passes, hopefully we'll get to a point where everything we do is related back to that mission.
How do you see storytelling and its use case in design, especially web design? We can bring it to that maybe more specifically. But how do you guys fundamentally use storytelling, and how does it tie into your process?
If there's not a story, idea or a story, then we're like, something's missing. How do we find it? How can we massage it more? How can we find it? But one of the ways I think it shows up a lot is in the way we work, because yes, upfront in the strategy and laying the foundation, we work with our clients on a simple question saying, what's this a story about? And they often don't have the answer, but then we may come back and say, we think this is a story about X. It's a story about creators finding something, right? Or it's a story about, but that's something we then weave in there and see if it resonates. And then that story idea is often also connected to a visual idea of how do you tell that story visually? Well, that could be something about, I don't know, layering, and it's this, and it's connected to the story about something. In our own branding, it's obviously a story about time, which it's very on the nose. There's the sand, there's time running out, there's even a clock in there. But it's telling a story about time, and so we try to find that story when we work with our clients. So that's in one aspect, very upfront. Then you said in terms of web design, obviously it depends on what you're building or what the needs are, but we work a lot like storytellers in that we storyboard. We say, okay, the way you experience any digital experience is sequential, right? It is a sequence of events, whether I'm trying to book a car or I'm just going through a site. Like, it's always a sequence. Well, I'm scrolling down or going through layers, and that's what a story is. It's a sequence of events where you then add a problem and some drama and things like that. So in itself, interactive design is always already sequential. So it's quite easy to tap into that and say, well, while achieving these goals across these steps, how can we weave in a narrative in between it or as part of it? And we do that a lot with storyboarding. So we'll sit there and do an experience from A to B, really, and then say, okay, it starts over here. When I then do this, this is gonna happen. And in that transition, we are gonna do this thing, which is gonna symbolize something like this, and that's gonna take me over here. And now the story continues, and so on and so on. And that, I mean, that's a technique we've completely just stolen from animators and movies and storytelling, to say, like, well, if we want storytelling in our work, we should just work like storytellers do.
And I would say from like a client perspective, it works really well as well. Like, they understand way better the experience that we are visioning for them. They're never really sitting with lots of questions, because we are not allowing anything to be up for doubt, because we think about those in between frames, right? You have to think about that when you work within just the viewport always, instead of creating long artboards that is more like an editorial approach. So I feel like when convincing someone on design, then it's easier for them to understand it that way.
It's also something that maybe like it's fundamental in our core that like even our ancestors, this is always something that has been timeless. And
Yeah.
maybe that's another aspect of this episode is kind of like focusing on like the essentials and the things that never change. So storytelling has always been important, whether you're, you know, in a tribe around a fire as a source of entertainment, or communicating a value system or religion, or narratives for growing as a person. But it also translates to marketing and business and communicating to an audience or even a client in this case. So it does seem like something that will always be important and is essential to our mission as creative individuals who communicate ideas for a living. So I guess like that's fundamental. But the other part of that maybe is like, in a world that is so overloaded with just new brands, content, this algorithmic model where things are so flashy and snappy, is there stories that rise to the top, and how can we as creative professionals maybe create stories that maybe slow people down, or maybe in some cases you need to speed people up if the content is, or the brand is dependent on that. But I guess really the question in there is how to create something that is maybe engaging and gets people to actually pay attention in this world that is completely overloaded with messaging and brands and products.
It's a
That's the
difficult
million
task,
dollar
right?
question, right?
Yeah.
Like,
I'm selfishly asking because I'm like, I want to know the secret if they have it.
I feel like if we can crack this one between the three of us, we will get very rich very soon.
Yes, exactly. Let's make a course and sell it, and then boom,
Exactly.
millionaires overnight.
I saw on Instagram recently someone from a similar background like ours doing a reel and saying that storytelling for brands was not necessary anymore. Now it was more just about setting a vibe, because everything was so short all the time. And I thought that was an interesting point, and say like, yeah, I can see what you mean by that. I would then challenge that and say, no, it's not enough with just a vibe, because that vibe is also a story you're trying to tell. You're just not able to articulate it, so you call it a vibe. But I think you can still tell stories. You just have to tell them in much smaller chunks at a time. So instead of getting the benefit of a nice couple of minutes or something, you're just getting little snippets. But you can still, whether it's telling the story of living an urban life or whatever it is, I think that's still possible. And there are so many great short films and examples of storytelling that don't even say anything. It's just emotion and seeing that emotion and then stitching it together. So I think it's still possible. But it's obviously
Up,
challenging.
right?
Oh yeah,
Up
the
by
first
Pixar.
couple of minutes.
The first 5 minutes, right? It's a few minutes and it just hits that nerve, and it's incredible that you can, in such a short amount of time, without having really established any characters, you can create such a deep connection to a viewer.
Yeah.
You know, that's really hard to get to that point. But I mean, there's many elements you can play with, right? And I think in general, I guess it's all about standing out in a way, right? There's constant trends that forces us to do everything the same. So I think it's also like sometimes get out of and have a little bit of an overview of what's happening and say, what could we do different with this media or this particular period in time to grab that attention? I mean, there's many tricks in storytelling, right? That gets us hooked back in, like an element of surprise or whatever it is that snaps us back into the chair.
Yeah, and that's probably like a good thought, is like to pay attention to media, maybe like in this case like storytelling, and like what are the aspects that we find in like a book that's really captivating? Like, is it that there's a semblance of there's like a pace that's slow in a book and then gets really intense and then like comes back down after like this really climactic moment. Or even in music, I think there's like a Jay-Z quote that every song can't be a banger on your album. I'm probably like
Yeah.
butchering it, but you can't have every song be like the single, the radio single. You got to
Yeah.
have a flow in a story, even in that, in multiple mediums. And so in the case of like visual design, what are those elements, whether it's a shift in typography, scaling, color shift, like how can we create
Yeah.
captivating moments that stand out even on a something that scrolls or in a transition? And that is
Yeah.
for everyone to determine what is appropriate for their project, but maybe don't look at websites for the core fundamental thing to teach you about what you need to do for your project. Maybe you can look at other mediums, even if it's written, and kind of take from those examples to incorporate in the flow of what you're designing.
And I think if you do, the work becomes more interesting because you're cross-pollinating instead of just like echo chambering the same over the same.
We also talk a lot about mechanisms, Steffen and I, like how certain things are working, right? One thing is to scroll up and down a page, but we navigate the world in so many different ways than just that. And I think the web should be a place where we can do more things than just scrolling vertically, just because some UX person says that that's best practice. We also drive and we ride bikes and we ride scooters and we walk and we run in the real world. So we should also be able to do multiple things in the digital space.
There was something that really got me excited when, I guess this is like a how the sausage gets made. I like to send a questionnaire over to every guest, and you had put on that you guys are designing like a Michelin restaurant. And I'm super curious about that because it ties into what we were talking about previously about like process and how you guys work as a studio. So what does that mean, designing like a Michelin restaurant, and kind of can you break down your process a little bit for us?
When you look at very, very high professional kitchens, everything that happens in there happens for a reason. There's not a seed or berry or piece of meat or anything that gets in there without having a reason for how it got there and how it's going to get treated before it ends up on the plate. And that's also just in organization wise, like you know where the knives are, you know where everything is, and if it isn't there, that's a big problem. Where in our world, and maybe it's because most of it happens on computer screens, there's this idea that you don't really need to have such order. Things just kind of work out. Oh, it will work out. We'll cross the bridge when we get to it. Oh, it's just creative process. It's this squiggly thing that ends up at the destination. And I know it's very charming to say that's what creativity is, but I also think it's a bit of a blanket statement to cover for the fact of being disorganized and not having thought things through. Because not saying you shouldn't do some creative pivots, that's all good, but it doesn't have to be chaos. And I don't think many people like when their existence is in chaos. So when we look at, yes, a Michelin restaurant and we see the way they work and whatnot, that's always inspired us in the way we work. And in more recent times, we've started saying, oh, it's thinking holistically about your design process and your organization. So we call it holistic design. And it just means that your methods are as important as your results, and that you should look at your organization as a whole, or your team as a whole, if you can't control the whole organization. And then make sure that everything you're doing happens for a purpose that benefits everyone. And that the way you do it also benefits everyone. So we've invented all sorts of little things that just makes life easier and runs more smoothly. So we sit in 2 different time zones, but we do little video recaps at the end of the day. So I'm the one who logs off last, so I'll go in and I'll record. and I'll show what I've been working on, and I'll talk about what I thought about it. And sometimes I say, I don't like any of this. I think I have failed miserably today, and I'm stuck on these 5 things. But it takes 5 minutes to make. It's really easy. And by the time Jonas comes online in Denmark, he has a perfect view into my brain and is able to act much, much more efficiently than had I sent an update on Slack and saying, hey, I'm kind of stuck on these things. And so that's one example.
I would also say, Stefan, we work almost, one thing is a Michelin restaurant, but open kitchen. I mean,
Yeah, 100%.
This exact technique, we use it for our clients as well. So we actually do not make presentations at all. We update our clients in most cases every day with a similar video, if not the same video. And in that video, we just go chronologically through the day, explain to them what we have worked on. If something went wrong, we also highlight that. But the strength of that, we believe, is that they have full transparency to the project. They know every single detail and every single thought that have gone into it. And then when we meet once in a week, instead of us revealing this big presentation and overstimulating them for 45 minutes to then get an instant response or hoping for an instant response, they have so much context from an entire week of updates that instead of us presenting, we have a conversation with them and we take some decisions on that call about what directions to go and what to focus on. It becomes more like a work session, and in most cases, I would say like 95% of our cases, when we try to sell in concepts, we sell in the concepts that we believe in and not a Frankenstein of multiple directions that have been presented, because they understand the concept. They understand why it works. So I think that's one of the most powerful tools in our toolbox.
And to your point with Open Kitchen, it has been part of that kitchen, or seeing that kitchen, that is part of the experience of the dinner.
Yeah.
Versus the kitchen being closed, a plate comes out, it looks beautiful, tasted great, thank you. You know.
I'm curious if they respond to those, or if they kind of digest them and just stay kind of like in the know as the project is progressing forward to your kind of next like in-person over the internet video call session.
It varies, I would say. It depends on the client. Some of them we don't hear from at all. Some of them reacts with an emoji. Some of them responds every day on the videos. I would say in all cases, when there is something in there that they do not align with, that is not a direction they want to take, then they verbalize it, which is great for us because that might save us 4 days of work. So we catch things on the go.
I didn't.
And I think yeah, so we can pivot instantly based on what they are telling us. So they also in that way feel heard, I guess. And I think another thing, when we don't build presentation, is that it allows us way more time to just sit and be productive together and work together and design more. So at the end of the day, they get way more hours of actual work, because to me, setting up a presentation is not actual work. It's setting up a scene to sell in something that we believe in. But to me, that also creates a scene where if I was someone buying, is there something behind the scene that is just holding this up with tape and, is it actually holding? Where I feel like when you give them the context, you show them everything that does not hold. And that convinces them that the direction you believe in holds.
That's super true, because you don't really need to have that like big Don Draper moment. You can kind of open up Figma, take them through, or present, or show little animations or prototypes and achieve the same effect without trying to do this insane high fidelity thing that probably took you and 3 people like 40 hours to craft just for one meeting. You can be more human in that way and guide them through and talk about the ideas and talk about where it is going, and then the main thing is that the ultimate end product, the end destination, is that super high crafted, polished, like beautiful thing. So allocating your time and hours, again, taking it back to like how you're spending your time and your days to achieve the end result, opposed to like the flashy kind of just like
Yeah.
presentation and polish there.
We try to stay in sketch mode as long as possible, because it feels like wasted energy if you have a team working on, like, let's say a motion piece, like you mentioned, for 4 days, and they're really happy about it and super stoked, and then you reveal it, and then the client doesn't like it. You know, it hits a team when something like that happens, and then it makes the work not so fun to make because you're disappointed that they didn't find the idea that you liked as good as you thought it was. I think this way it almost takes you out of the work a little bit and looks at it just as a piece of work and not as a piece of you.
I find that really inspiring. It's something that I think can be taken into our process a little bit more.
It's tough, right? To nail. I mean, every client is different. Every process is different. Every project is different. And I feel like there's always something you learn on every single one, and every process is just unique in its own way, and it's a roller coaster ride every single time. Even if you think you have a Michelin kitchen behind you.
Maybe that's where the metaphor kind of varies, because our kitchen is very systematized, and maybe it's like they know what they're doing every time. The prep is virtually the same every single day. They're kind of producing the same menu. Whereas in our industry, every client is almost like throwing out the old menu and bringing in a new menu. So maybe there's metaphors to create again, but I think it's like making your kitchen run super smoothly, having the right process or the prep. So like all of those things are automatic. And then like when you do have the time and the ability to like create that new menu, you have a system, a guideline, even if you need to like buy new ingredients or iterate on the process or find different team members to come in and assist you in that project or like the menu.
You're actually nailing it a little bit there in terms of, you know, the mindset of the client, which we are trying to change a little bit in our shop, because you're exactly right. A client comes in with their own menu card about what they want us to serve them. And I would love that clients came into our shop for the experience that we want to give them. And, you know, that is something we are working on currently in terms of telling that story to clients and nailing, you know, that mindset down so that when we go into a project together, they have different expectations that they will normally have. That would be amazing to get to that point. And we are working on it.
Yeah, and I think to your point with the prep, it is correct. Like when you're making the same thing every day, you know the recipe. In our case, we spend a lot of time up front before a project starts to plan it out and try to design a process where we're like, well, if this is what we need to solve, how are we gonna work together and how are we gonna do it so it ends up there, versus just showing up, say, okay, let's start the project. Now it starts and not having any process. So we spend a lot of time laying down that track and planning that before we start, so that we know that when we begin, everything we do will be purposeful. There's pivots on the way, and then we pivot and rejig it. And some things we think that are gonna work super amazing doesn't work at all, and then you gotta scrap them right away. But we at least always attempt to try and put in proper planning work up front, so it's not a string of random actions.
It's almost like a role play of, what if we take it down the route of 3D? What would that look like? What if we need to use this kind of navigation or whatnot? You know, we play out a lot of different variations that we know is common, just to get a sense of what resources would we need to be able to make that. Could we do it just the two of us? Or would we require someone from the outside to come in and help? Does a client have the budget to even do something like this? And I think I actually love that part of this work. I'm getting more and more into that part. because it can really set projects up for success if you do it well, and set the teams up for success and the clients at the end of the day.
It's refreshing to hear, to spend like the extra time at the beginning so you don't lose time in the end and have to pay out for extra contractors when you could have allocated that budget in the beginning because you knew kind of where you wanted to go. Assemble the perfect menu, the perfect team, perfect kitchen, keeping the metaphor going.
Yeah, exactly. It's a good metaphor.
I really like it because, like you had said, in the case of Michelin restaurants, there's a lot of prefixed menus where you don't get to say any revisions or any, like, you don't even have a say of the menu. It just comes out because that's what they're making that day. And the only thing that you can comment on is like, I'm allergic to this. I literally cannot eat it.
A lot of our proposals, when we send them out or present them to potential clients, we're offering them ranges, right? Like, this is what you get for this price. This is what you can get for that price or that price. It just shows them that, you know, we can accomplish many different things together, but it also comes down to what you're willing to pay. But everything in that menu makes sense for the ask that you are coming with. It's not just saying, "Oh, we'll throw AI in there and motion because why not?" You know, it has to make sense for what they are asking for.
How are you approaching that so that it's very distinct and is easy to understand?
Part of when you write them, and sometimes we workshop it quite a bit to try to get to ranges. So let's say you're doing 3 ranges, for example. There are many times where we sit with 2 ranges and look at them, and then one of us say, "Why should I buy this one?" Like, it's not better than the cheaper one. It's just a bit more bloated. So unless I really want a couple extra shiny things, why would I pay more for it? And so just like everything else, we workshop that quite a bit to say like, no, okay, so how do you get into an essence of like, what's the MVP? What does that cost based on the time we think we need, the people we need, what you need, all those things. And then how do we make sure that the other ranges are equally good investments? In the sense that I'm not just getting extra whipping cream on top. It's actually fundamentally a little different and built a little different. Takes a little more time, but I also get more out of my money. And so that comes into that planning work again, saying like, well, you could do it quick and scrappy, and it would actually get you really, really, really far. It won't get you all the way, but it will get you really far. So in that sense, it's a good investment. But if you want to do it right, then it does take quite a bit longer. And now you see your price go up a little bit. But then it's also one and done. And so it's a lot of planning and making sure it's set up right. Because, we have times where we look at it and say, I wouldn't buy the more expensive one. It doesn't solve anything for my business that the other one doesn't.
Yeah, we don't always have 3 prices. We have the prices we think make sense. We're actually very much against showing 3 directions or 3 something. Just because some project manager told us we had to do that. You should show the amount that makes sense. If that's 2 or 1 or 3 or 4, then show that. Don't just do 3 because you are told to. It should only make sense.
Tying into this idea of like budgeting and finding the right clients goes into like what we were talking about earlier about like principles and values. And you have a pretty robust series of principles and values on your website. How do those kind of guide you in your everyday creative process?
They're there to remind us why we did this in the first place. And when in doubt, there's often some good answers in there. Now, that doesn't mean they're always set in stone and this is just it and they're never changing. We sometimes find one of them and say, this one is actually repetitive because the meaning of it is also found in the other one. We think this principle should be added to it or amended. So a little bit like the Constitution. One of them that's been a real evergreen and comes up a lot is the one we call that it's a matter of angle. and that one is simply about that there is no such thing as a bad brief. There's just bad ideas, right? So it is true, some briefs, when you get them, they don't sound like this is going to be a hit at all. And the first pictures you get in your head are also not what you would hope for. But Jonas and I, we spend a ton of time when we get a challenge, and we find it, we are good sportsmen in the sense that we like when a challenge like this comes in, because you're like, oh, this is fun because this is not easy to crack. And so if you can crack it, that's a really fun feeling. But we believe like it's in it comes down to our ability to make something interesting, whether the brief was interesting or not. And so we spend a ton of time brainstorming and saying like, how can you attack this topic or this thing from a different angle than has been done before? And when you do that, what would that do to that category or this idea?
When I think back on being a young designer in the industry, you go to the agency or the studio you're working at, and you're always hoping for that next project to be, the dream client or something super interesting, where you can just see that portfolio piece being made, right? And you can just see all the awards in front of you that you're going to win. And then you get something else and you are slightly disappointed or maybe even pissed because you have already worked on 6 other projects for this client already. And that mindset is toxic, to be honest. That mindset doesn't take you anywhere. And anyone who have had that experience, I would say, talk to yourself on the inside. Tell yourself it's just a matter of finding the right angle, and I can find that right angle. If you tell yourself that enough times, you're going to rewire your own thinking about briefs. You're going to rewire your own approach to creative challenges. And instead of seeing it as, I hate this is going to suck, it's going to be more of a, fuck yeah, let's do it. Let's find this nugget of gold that is in there. It's going to be tough, but we can find it. And it just makes work way more fun to have that mindset. And it pushes you to think differently. It pushes you to produce something people haven't potentially seen before. And in, like what Steffen is saying, in categories that are potentially, stuck in a pattern of doing the same things because they look at each other, and make someone else shine in a new way that then makes everyone else do that one thing you came up with.
Going back to we had the restaurant metaphor. If you're telling me that you can't cook good food without champagne, foie gras, and caviar, then I don't want to hire you as a chef, because that's not true. You can make amazing things, even of a hit of celery, if you're good at what you do. So if you are really good creative, then be creative. Use your creativity to solve these problems, because that's what it's meant for.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it comes down to in not having that judgmental first impression. You probably need to talk to this client and understand who they are and why they're coming to you, because they may be super excited to work with you guys, the studio, the individual designer, because of the fact that they've seen something that was unique or different, and they're looking for that same thing. So, I mean, by giving them the expected, you're not, well, one, you could not be challenging them, but two, you could be not even giving them what they wanted in the first place, which was something innovative or different.
There's a scale to it as well, right? A 10 creatively for us might be a 500 for some clients, and you gotta meet them. You gotta be realistic sometimes in terms of what they need, because it can also scare them off if you're too much out there. And that comes, I think, with experience of like leveling that out, finding the right places to be. But that doesn't mean that there isn't an angle that is still interesting for someone who's less wild as you may be.
Connecting full circle to what we had mentioned about storytelling, finding that right story, making work that matters to them specifically, having that human and empathetic touch, and then just crafting around that. And I hope that some people will take some of these messages to heart, to think about how they're using their time, and also think about maybe I should be more transparent with my client. Maybe I should update them more, spend less time on the presentation, and maybe polishing their ego, but doing what is best for the person that's paying them for this job or the team that they're working with.
100%.
Are there particular things in the world of design that you're particularly excited about at the moment?
Is this the time where we have to say AI?
You can. We can have a conversation without AI. That's totally fine too.
I know, I'm just cracking jokes. What do you think, Jonas? What are you excited about?
I'm excited to see the level of craft that young people have right out the gate. Like, I've seen so many designers that have not even started design school who can do product renders that is like at the level of what you would get from a real shop, and they know typography without even having theory about it. They just use their eyes, and they have so much to look at every single day that, you know, I'm not threatened about it, but I'm like, whoa, if I had that amount of skill when I was that age, man, you know, that would have taken me places. But I'm very excited about that, to see the skill coming out. And then I think it's adding that layer of understanding the skills a little bit. If that, it's almost like working backwards, right? Sometimes we all come up with a good idea where we almost have to sell it backwards to get that idea through. And I feel like that's where it is with young people. They are very good with their hands, but they are almost they need to put some theory behind it. They need to understand how to drive a manual car, if you know what I mean. So I'm very excited about that. I'm not so excited about how people are not respectful in terms of other people's work, how they just remake it or make a copy, like straight up copy, and make it their own website, whatever it is, branding, graphics. I think there needs to be a better level of decency in terms of respecting someone else's creation. It's fine to take inspiration. It's fine to be guided by something else, but you need to come up with something that is purely your own. It's a great way to start something, but it needs to become its own. And I see too much out there that is just the same shit over and over again.
But it's also like disrespectful in a way, because if that thing is created for a client who paid for something, then there is like a transaction, and that client expects that to be the only one, or close to the only one of that type of thing in the world. That is kind of like a lot of what we do, is create original things for people or unique things for people, and there's a business incentive behind that. So if you're young and maybe a little dumb out there, maybe a little fearful, take that into consideration, that you do have more creativity than you think is imaginable, and you can edit and tweak things, and that your inspiration can come from anywhere, and you can create these great things. Also, if you get caught doing that, you can go to, and you can get a letter from lawyers, and it could make your life really complicated. So be advised.
What about you, Steffen? What do you think?
Tech-wise, I'm very excited about real-time graphics. And I know everyone's AI hype right now. So why is they talking about AI? But I don't know. I think real-time graphics are super interesting, and I'm excited about, for example, in the world of 3D, where traditionally we have to render everything, right? Like, so it's a big pipeline, and you can obviously make the shiniest, best things that way, and that will probably stay the same for quite a bit. But the results you can get nowadays with a real-time engine, I think, is amazing. And so whether you are producing a TV show like The Mandalorian and you use real-time graphics for the backgrounds, or you could use real-time for product shots and whatnot, I just think it's really, really promising, because it's not set in stone, and it's not static, and you can change it and interact with that environment. So I'm really curious to see that where that goes in the future, and then that ties into. I know Apple made Vision Pro, and then nothing really happened, and no one talks about it. And maybe it's a fiasco. I don't know. But I don't like I don't want to wear a helmet like that. I can guarantee you that. But I like what happens inside of the helmet. I think that's cool. And if we follow what is it called, Moore's law, then it's a matter of time before that thing is so small that it doesn't have to be in the helmet anymore. Mm-hmm. Even though I don't know what they're going to do with the battery, because we're a little behind on that technology. But it should be, theoretically, it should be a matter of time. And I think the idea of such an interface and a way to interact with technology, I think is amazing, super awesome. And that makes us in with real time as well, because now real time graphics can also be part of something that's not just on a phone screen, but something more immersive. So I think that has a lot of promise, but I think it needs a ton of time, tons and tons of time before we get there. And so that, I guess, takes us short-term look out. It wouldn't be a podcast without saying AI. I think the world is too high on its own farts when it comes to AI. And that apparently is the cycle of tech these days. But I do think on a very practical level, there is some of the generative AI that seems really, really promising. Also for being a design studio and helping support scalability and things like that, where even I know it's so simple, but I love Photoshop now has a button to remove the background without me having to trace it, because I have spent hours and days tracing stuff. And now generative AI can figure that out for me. That is awesome. Love it. And so I am looking forward to see it in a world where it's less hyped and where it becomes more practical. And where it's less about like, oh my God, this is happening. And it's more about people saying, hey, what are some really practical, really useful things we can use this for? And I imagine that over the next couple of years, you start seeing that pop up more, and then the hype will like die down a little bit. It will become a bit more reasonable. And that's the part I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, I like all of like the practical things, like having AI summarize like meeting notes so that someone doesn't have to just type that. And obviously, like, there may be some human like editing after the fact, but I can recall from my brain what happened and kind of go in and fix everything and then email that off, which is great. Or like you had mentioned, the Photoshop, like cutting out backgrounds, which was the most obnoxious thing ever to have to do.
For me, AI, it has opened a lot of doors creatively, because I mean, Steffen, he's lucky, he can draw, and I'm not so fortunate, I cannot draw at all. But it has enabled me to be able to visualize my ideas the way I sort of see them, or at least get it closer to the end result. And I think conceptually, it has helped our shop a lot in terms of selling through stories or ideas and make them way more looking like real things instantly. I mean, we don't use AI as here, create a website for us. It's more like, oh, we need a person that sits in this sort of light, in this sort of scene, to get that feeling of a certain mood that we want to hit. And that is amazing for that. Or we wanna brand this sick backpack, but we wanna brand it on the inside. Like, we only have it from the side. Can we use this asset to get up and see it from the top? And you can. And I think that is so sick that you can, instead of looking through the internet of photos to find that needle in the haystack, you can just write what you want, and then it spits out in most cases something that is useful with a little bit of jigging. And that just speeds up the process and makes the process more fun, I think, rather than tedious of just looking around, searching in the right way or bookmarking in the right way to then use something later on.
what are you guys using in terms of like technology to help achieve that? Are you using Midjourney or something else?
Like Midjourney has been the go-to and has done the job for most of it. And I think we've had a lot of success with also giving it a reference. So instead of trying to prompt your way out of everything, which is also a thing tech-wise, I have to say, I think AI tools interface and user experience-wise are really weird. It's a visual tool, but it's not visual input.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, visual people are visual people. So it should be a visual interface where I can draw, I can add references, and can workshop my way to what I want. But that's not where we are right now. So I'll look forward to that future maybe happen. We've had a lot of success with giving, for example, Midjourney and image, and to your example with the backpack. We like this backpack. This backpack is 500 times 500 pixels. It is useless. We can't use it for selling an idea or anything. But now you can see it, and you can see what we mean. So, computer, what are you seeing? And it will tell you, I'm seeing this. Okay, try generate me one. Nice. I'm going to edit this and what you're seeing, but then I think we are aligned. And then it actually makes an image bigger and better and fits what you need, but it's based on your reference. Versus going in and writing up a prompt, and then you always get these kind of generic results. Yeah. Unless you are extremely specific. And so, yeah, we've just had a lot of hits with saying like, no, let's keep working the way we do, which is by visual reference or drawing or whatever it is. And then try give that to the machine and see what comes out of that. And I think it creates more unique things that way as well.
And I think it ties back to kind of like the human element and guiding and creative direction in that way too. It's not just like spray and pray or just hoping that you get the right result and then editing ad nauseum.
And I think that's why, AI will never replace us because we are finding creative ways to use the AI tools and give us new things, right? So I'm not threatened by this tool. I just feel more empowered to do new things or things quicker.
It's at this point that I like to open it up to you guys. If there's any wise words or last things that you would want to communicate to the audience. You've been preaching the whole episode, so if there's any last things, go for it.
I'm going to say principle number 1, have fun. Seriously. Like that, if you're not having fun doing it, I don't think it's worth doing.
Stop up sometimes and feel in your body if you are spending your time meaningfully on this earth. And if you have a feeling that you are not, you have the power to change that. So go for it. Figure out what makes you happy and then do that more. Make time for it.
These are the messages that we all need to hear more. And to the audience, remember that we are all legendary and have amazing story of our own. So on that journey, take the time to be kind, grind, and unwind. Well, in this case, think about your life and reflect on that. And let's make the world a better and more creative place to live. Jonas, Steffen, thank you so much for coming on. And honestly, preaching and sharing that, I think it'll help a lot of people.
Thank you.
Hope
Appreciate it. If not, then we're very sorry for wasting your time.
2 hours of your life, yeah.
Yeah.